Hi everyone, this is week 4, unit 3 of neuroscience for non-majors. I hope you're all doing well, and please remember to turn in your comic homework assignments by the beginning of class on Monday the 21st. I posted the office hours review slides on Canvas addressing the areas of confusion you answered in your exit survey from last week. Okay, I'll share my screen. In this week's lecture, we'll learn about different parts of the brain and spinal cord and the central and peripheral nervous systems. So the brain can be divided into different lobes. The frontal lobe is for kind of more executive decision making and thinking, the occipital lobe for visual processing, the temporal lobe for memory and recognition, the parietal lobe for spatial processing and kind of sensory processing, and then this part at the back, the cerebellum for balance and coordination. And kind of dividing the lobes are deep grooves called sulci or individual sulcus, and but then the deep groove that separates the temporal lobe from the rest of the brain is the Sylvian fissure. Now between the frontal and the parietal lobes, you'll have the central sulcus, and on either side of these you'll find a gyrus, and these are really important. The precentral gyrus has the motor cortex, and the motor cortex contains kind of a map of the human body, so meaning the tongue, fingers, etc. have their own designated spot that directly corresponds to movement in that body part. And the post-central gyrus over here in the parietal lobe portion is the somatosensory cortex, and it also contains a similar map of the human body that directly corresponds to like the sensation of touch in those body parts. The brain is also divided into two halves, cerebral hemispheres, and cortex is what we call the layer sort of coating these hemispheres, and it's where most of the information processing happens. And the folds of our brain allow us to have a lot more cortex, and this allows us to process a lot more information. Now, deeper within the brain, there are other structures that have crucial functions, such as the hypothalamus or the hippocampus or the basal ganglia, but we will learn about those in future lectures. Another really important part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord, and it receives sensory input from a cluster of sensory cell bodies called the dorsal root ganglion, and carries that into the spinal cord, and then that goes up into the brain. And it also contains motor neurons, which receive information from the brain, from motor cortex, and control muscles. And these motor neurons come together to form a ventral root. And those ventral and dorsal roots kind of together make the spinal nerves. In the cross section of the spinal cord, the part where the dorsal root enters is called the posterolateral sulcus, while the part where the ventral root enters, the part where the ventral root leaves is called the anterolateral sulcus. Now the posterior horn holds interneurons, neurons that connect with both the spinal cord neurons and neurons that form pathways to the brain. So they kind of connect, interneurons connect two different kinds of neurons together. And the anterior horn holds these things called alpha motor neurons, and these synapse onto skeletal muscles. And so the shaded area contains the cell bodies mostly, and while the unshaded area holds the axons, and the axons create the ascending and descending pathways to and from the brain. These pathways are called funiculi, And the ascending ones generally carry sensory information to the brain, while the descending ones generally carry motor information to the body. Some direction terms that are helpful when talking about the nervous system are anterior, means towards like the front of the body or the brain, while posterior means towards the back of the body or brain. Dorsal and ventral change meaning depending on whether you're talking about the brain or the spinal cord. In the brain, dorsal means towards the top of the head, while ventral means towards the bottom of the head, while in the spinal cord, dorsal means towards the back, while ventral means towards the stomach. So we've talked about the central nervous system that contains the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is also subdivided this peripheral nervous system is what we're going to talk about now, and it's divided into two different parts, the somatic and the autonomic. And the somatic nervous system is generally has to do with voluntary movement, and we kind of talked about this already, where it's the sensory information that the sensory cells that send information to the central nervous system, and then the process of transmitting motor information from the central nervous system to muscle cells. And then the autonomic nervous system has to do more with an involuntary movement. Oops. And it's subdivided into parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve fibers. And it regulates things like digestion and heart rate. And it carries signals to and from internal organs and conveys that information to the central nervous system. So the parasympathetic and sympathetic portions of the autonomic nervous system have to do with the parasympathetic nerve fibers help conserve energy, regulate digestion and make sure you're like digesting things properly, decrease and regulate heart rate, and it's kind of like the rest and digest system. The sympathetic nervous system and nerve fibers, on the other hand, kind of are involved with like increased energy use and consumption and increased blood pressure, activation of sweat glands, and it's involved in kind of the fight or flight response. And this is this is an overview of how the nervous system is structured, and we'll delve deeper into the details of how all of these basics are relevant starting next week, which is the sleep and memory unit, and where I'll start talking about current and like past crucial research in that field as well. For this week's homework assignment, I want you to write a rhyming poem that walks through and demonstrates your understanding of all of the following: parts of the brain, parts of the spinal cord, the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the somatic, and the autonomic. Sorry, that should be autonomic. Okay, that's it. See you soon.